a Hamas terrorist is willing to die and actually sacrifice all of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza for their cause, which is the destruction of Israel and all Jewish people.
Retired U.S. Army officer. I want to make sure I get all these right. He's a current colonel in the California State Guard. He is chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point and author of Understanding Urban Warfare. I think I've covered it all. Mr. John Spencer. All right, John Spencer, can you hear me, see me, sir? Thank you for being here.
I can see you and hear you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you. I apologize for the Lion King introduction, but we're okay with it. Now, because I really would like for you to speak with Josh. You know, Josh here has done 3 tours of duty himself. And by the way, thank you both for your service. Could you give the viewing audience, the person right now watching, listening, a bit of your background, kind of what it is that you do?
Sure. So I spent 25 years in the Army as an infantry soldier, both as a soldier and an officer, 2 combat deployments to Iraq, 1 in the invasion, and then 1 in 2008 during the height of basically sectarian violence in Baghdad. And then I went into basically academics after my career, where I've been studying all urban warfare from the ancient warfare to today for over a decade, and writing, have a podcast, and walking the ground. I go in and out of Ukraine. I go Nagorno-Karabakh. I've been to Israel. I've been to many of these places that were viciously slaughtered. I've eaten lunch in Sardot and a lot of that. So I'm a student of all of this, and hopefully can help people understand what they're seeing, like you were talking about.
Yeah,
and not try to go crazy about it.
Well, it's hard to sort of parse, reality from fiction right now, and I understand why people don't trust either side as far as the media. Josh, what would be kind of, if someone who's been on the ground, what would be your main question as far as, I guess, what are the unknowns here?
Well, for me, all my tours were in Afghanistan, and they were all after 2000 or 2009 or later. So it's a lot different than what you did, Colonel. And going into Iraq and going through the invasion, I think we're kind of looking at a similar thing. At least from the outside, it appears to be a similar situation. And I'm kind of thinking, like, what would be Israel's ultimate goal in this ground invasion going into Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's actually pretty clear, despite some of the comments from the political leaders, from military guys and analysts of these type of operations. It's very clear. Destroy Hamas military capability so they can never do another October 7th, 9/11 event, or send another rocket towards Israel civilians. You have to move forward. You have to destroy people, rockets, tunnels, everything. It's actually a very clear-cut military objective as opposed to some of the other ones that I've seen.
Like which ones would you say are not necessarily clear cut?
When the day after, right? When you have to stay around and build a nation and try to instill democracy and things like that are foreign to that environment.
Right.
Militaries can destroy other military capabilities. Militaries are horrible at building nations.
That makes sense.
Do you think there's no interest for Israel to rebuild anything after coming through or setting up a new government if they eradicate?
Yeah.
If they
Hamas, I'm pro eradicating Hamas.
Yeah, if they destroy Hamas and their Hamas government in Gaza.
Well, yes. So the day after, right? So that's always the question for any military operation. Israel says they have no intentions of governing Gaza ever again. But yeah, I mean, Hamas is not the only terrorist organization even in Gaza, right? You have PJI, Lion's Den. It's full of terrorists. So who governs it and then, again, doesn't become a threat again to Israel will be determine their approach. But right now, there's no other alternative. That's kind of the issue here, too, is that everybody wants to talk about a ceasefire, all this. Like, there is no other alternative. Here's an alternative. Every Hamas member surrenders, and there's a complete disarmament of Hamas military capability in Gaza, which is literally, you can see it from Israel. It's not like it's... Some people have this ideal, again, like you said about the refugee camp, which is just a classification in which you can get more aid from the United Nations. You have an idea of a refugee camp. It's not a concrete city. And you have an idea that Gaza is some faraway place from Israel. It's literally in eyesight, and the rockets come and have come every day since October 7th out of Gaza heading towards an Israeli civilian site.
Yeah, it would be like being in Manhattan and having rockets being felled from Hoboken.
Yes.
Let me ask you just as a layman, when you say this, because it seems like there can be the idea of ceasefire just seems so silly considering what happened right, in October. Now we're in November, so back in October. Gosh, time's moves
It's almost
quickly.
a month now.
Yeah. But why was there such a delay as far as going into, Gaza, going into, I graze. It's a meal plan. Going into Gaza by land. Why was there a delay? Will that hinder or will it help Israel's chances of success? And obviously there's a difference between the airstrikes and the missiles, but boots on the ground, why the delay?
I mean, there's many. Number one, it takes a long time to gather an army of this size, especially the way that Israel relies on their reserve force, right? Their bankers and everybody stops what they're doing and goes back to their units and forms up and gets all the tanks and all the bulldozers and everything in position. It isn't like they just planned this in the last 2 weeks either. They've had plans for decades for the possibility of this operation. And then, like you said, Israel started asking for evacuations. You can't demand evacuations on October 7th.
Right.
Especially in the Hamas strongholds, which is, if you look at, like you said, Jabalah is in that northeastern sector of Gaza where IDF said from day one, this is where the majority of the combat is. Please evacuate from these areas.
Yeah.
And 800,000 supposedly have, but that's another reason why the right thing to do. Not even the legal requirement, right? Like the U.S. doesn't call a building before we strike it in any wars that I've ever been in. In that ability to attack a city, the right thing to do is provide time for all non-combatants, although Hamas doesn't wear a uniform, to get out of the cities. So that's the reason. But it's also about putting in all the U.S. capabilities. Israel. This is not new to Israel having to go to war after being attacked, right? It was attacked by 5 nations during the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. But it's always had to stand alone. And as a U.S. citizen, I was really proud of when the U.S. said Israel's had to stand alone before, but they'll never have to stand alone again.
Right.
So getting those U.S. ships, as the people think, like the carrier strike groups, into the area to be able to stop somebody like Iran or Syria or from getting involved, that takes time.
Well, that's an important distinction because, look, I have said not one American soldier's life lost for the war between Israel and Hamas is my point of view. But I think that morally they need to be supported in defending themselves. That's very different, however, from, hey, look, let them duke it out. Iran, we've got our eye on you, right? Flicking that jet. That's different because Iran is a threat to American national security. Would you agree with that assessment that is a reasonable view for people to have? We do not get involved ourselves directly with Israel, Hamas, but certainly we have to have our eye on Iran and Hezbollah. When we're talking about Lebanon, we're talking about Yemen. A lot of people who could jump in.
That's right, and defensively, that also means that we can knock rockets out of the sky that are heading to Israel civilian sites.
Right. And what did you have another question there, Josh? Because I don't know, because you've been in the actual. Yeah. We're all here. I'm pussy boys.
What the guy with a pussy boy?
Yeah, well, I didn't want to go into, I never wanted to join the military largely because,
Me neither.
Small hands. But the Canadian military, a little bit different. I didn't want to be in a Cessna 182 with a shotgun. That's why I didn't want to join the Air Force, So if I was in the States, I might have been a little bolder.
Canadians, the Nazis of Kandahar. But yeah, so these soldiers, these IDF soldiers going into Gaza, what does it look like for them? What kind of obstacles will they face, and how quickly do you think they can accomplish their objectives going into an urban warfare?
And if I could add to that, I think for a layman, right, because a lot of people will say, hey, you know what? When people talk about the Second Amendment, the Taliban, right? These guys out there who are just basically using monkey bars and old AKs, they were able to hold off in many ways the strongest military that's ever existed, right? The American military. A big part of that was just home court advantage. Yeah. How big of a role does that play here? Because the home court advantage is these urban areas that are used in people as human shields.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a kind of a Bell's curve of scum on the earth, and some use human shields, some don't. Hamas uses and builds all of its infrastructure for the sole purpose of restricting what IDF soldiers can do in accordance with the law of war, because that a professional military with values, ethics follows the law of war, and despite the two-sided conversation. So what does this look for the IDF is that, of course, Hamas has prepared for decades for this likelihood, right? So but very asymmetrically. They're not dumb like the Iraqi military who tried to stand toe to toe with the U.S. military. They're going to try to fight asymmetrically, like hide in holes, hide in tunnels, pop up from hard buildings, and use snipers and use IEDs that are very familiar to U.S. soldiers. And try to trick the IDF forces or pull them into the urban area where there's a lot of advantages from being able to pick which window you shoot from and surprise the IDF that has to move forward. Now, on the IDF side, it looks like a very slow, deliberate clearing operation, but the IDF uniquely are designed for this, right? The IDF isn't like the U.S. military that has to be prepared to fight globally against our enemies. They're fighting home, literally, like they can see their house from where they're fighting.
Right.
And they have unique bulldozers that we don't have that are 2 stories tall that can be remote controlled that will go forward into the urban area, take the shot from the terrorists, and then, okay, now I know where you are. I can drop the building if I want or engage it with the tank round.
Bit of a movement to contact type of thing.
It is. It really is. And this is why it's unique, too. This is something that the IDF hasn't really done in a very long time. Like even the past operations into Gaza, I mean, they used to occupy Gaza, right? They used to.
2005, they left.
That's right. And in 2008, they went back in Operation Cast Lead. 2014, they went back, but they were very limited operations.
Yeah.
Like they didn't try to punch to the middle of Gaza City. This will be hell. I mean, look up, 10, 20-story buildings where the enemy could be launching anything down on top of you. This is the ideal, and I know you were talking about before, is the ideal that this can be some type of surgical operation. No, in the history of urban warfare, it will look like it was carpet bombed, even when it wasn't. It'll look like raised earth. It will look like hell on earth.
Is there any, or to what extent, I guess, could civilian casualties, I guess, be avoided? The way you're describing it, is it a lost cause, or are there things that can be done?
Can I add to that question?
Yeah, please do.
To add to that question, do you think it's going to be less casualties or less destructive than bombing?
Right. So this is the paradox where I tell people, if you want to cause less destruction in urban areas, you need a bulldozer and a tank. Because if you don't have those, if you don't go into an urban area and you try to bomb it, there's never been in history that achieves this level of mission. You can't even convince the enemy to give up by just straight bombing. And a Hamas terrorist is willing to die and actually sacrifice all of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza for their cause, which is the destruction of Israel and all Jewish people. So is it a lost cause? No. Again, there are legal requirements that must be taken by the IDF, like asking civilians to leave, like identifying only military targets. You can't shoot at a hospital, a mosque, anything like that, unless it's being used for military purposes. So this is the thing that people want to kind of gloss over in the media, is that the IDF have done beyond requirements to get civilians out of the way, right? And that's why, amazingly, in Jaballo, after that strike, there's hundreds of military-aged males standing around the crater. Like, what are you doing there? Like, that is just where you've been asked to leave for your own safety, for the safety of your families if they're still there.
Right.
So IDF actually does other things that we don't do. Again, calling buildings before they strike them, like calling everybody and sending everybody in the building a text to include the enemy. We're about to hit this building. You have an hour to get out. There's all kinds of things the IDF do to limit civilian casualties.
So they have pretty extensive rules of engagement then.
They do too, yeah. Positive identification of the enemy. I mean, but this is the thing. There's been, in the 2017 Battle of Mosul, and again, it was against ISIS, so I guess the media didn't care as much. There was 10,000 civilian casualties in the Battle of Mosul, which was Iraqi security forces backed by U.S. military air power.
Yeah. Well, I want to continue this, but we're going a little bit over time here. I'd like to continue on Mug Club here in a moment for those, because we can take their chat as well. Where's the best place for people to find you, John Spencer? I know your book, Understanding Urban Warfare, is available everywhere. Is there anywhere else people can go in?
Yeah, johnspenceronline.com. I'm trying to throw all my stuff onto that website.
Okay, johnspenceronline.com. This is fascinating for me, and I want I want to hear more between you and Josh. By the way, thank you all for your service. We appreciate it. And if you are watching right now, and we do have an open invitation to any Hamas representative, pro-Palestinian Hamas representative on this show to present their side of the issues. It's not going to be a Pierce Morgan situation where we would like to keep people accountable, and members of the IDF. I'd love to have a split screen with all of you. This conversation is important. Of course, you know where I line up. I don't lie about my biases. If you're on Rumble, click this button, join Mug Club, because none of this happens without you. We're going to continue with John Spencer. Thank you, Rumble, YouTube. Piss off.
Watch Louder with Crowder live Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.